All right, so coming up here, we have Sahil Chaturvedi. He's a product designer at Unchained Capital. We have Paul from Voltage, and it is going to be moderated by Badass Bitch. That is the only name you're getting, because I think you know him already. All right, give him a warm welcome, guys.
Let's see. Okay, I figured out how to work a microphone, so my day is going good. Hi, I'm what he just said. I'm Stephen DeLorme. These guys are just so out of control that they have to be moderated, so that's why I'm here. Is your microphone on, Paul?
Hello.
Is yours on?
Testing.
All right, we have working mics, so that is good. So thanks for coming, everybody. We'll go do some quick introductions real quick. I'm Stephen DeLorme. I'm a designer, and I make contributions to the Bitcoin design community, mostly focusing on the Bitcoin design guide and adding Lightning kind of user experience principles to that. I try to work on other Bitcoin open source projects where I can. So why don't you tell us a little about yourselves and what you work on?
Yeah, I'm Paul. I do front end at Voltage. I am a hobbyist designer, I would say. I've done a little bit of stuff with the open source, like the Bitcoin design stuff. And Sahil, Carr, and I in Austin started the Austin Bitcoin Design Club. So it's a meetup where we talk about this exact topic.
Yeah, I'm Sahil. Like Paul mentioned, we run the Austin Bitcoin Design Club. It's really fun. Come check it out. My day job, I work at Unchained Capital, so I'm a product designer there, primarily working on self-custody, multi-sig, vault type stuff. So I'm sure we'll talk about this, but there's a ton of challenges in a lot of these kind of products. So.
Yeah, so before we go any further, because I think, there's a lot of kind of terms in design that, people sometimes get confused with each other, and there's a lot of different areas you can work in design. So maybe we should get some terms squared away for everyone in the audience. User experience. How do you define user experience?
Ooh, that's a can of worms. But I think the way I would think about that is the user journey when using a product. So if you open up YouTube, what does your path look like from the moment you click the app to open a video to bookmark it to whatever? So thinking about that journey and all the different personas and different journeys within that product, I would say that's user experience, yeah.
Yeah, and then user interface, it's like you see these terms all the time, UX/UI. They kind of go together, but they're different things. User interface, something very, very specific. Paul, you want to take a crack at that one? How do you?
This is how pretty does it look?
How pretty does it look, and how usable is it? So you as a front end developer frequently have to collaborate with folks like me and Sahil. To actually build that. So I think of the UI is the actual thing. You open the app. This is literally what I see when I open the app. What is the button that I push? And then the experience. The user experience. We're thinking more broadly about how do they get on started with the service? And maybe they're using our website one day, and then the next day when they're out, they're using the mobile app or something like that. And so there's this whole broader picture of how they interact with your product or your service or whatever it is you're building.
And obviously, the way you're defining it, there's a huge overlap in these things where I find it personally, it's much more fun and easy to make something that looks pretty, but does it work well? And also, importantly, does it, talking about that user journey, does it match the user's expectation of how they think they're going to use it? Like, can you draw on their experience with this kind of product to have them successful in your product?
I think it's also worth mentioning, UI in some ways is not just does it look pretty, is it beautiful, but it's kind of problem solving. It's like you're problem solving using visual design techniques, and looking pretty is one problem you're solving. Almost, you could think about it that way. It needs to evoke emotions, it needs to feel good, but it also needs to be balanced and needs to guide your eye through the UI properly. So it really is problem solving at the end of the day.
Yeah. And that's really important what you said about does it match what they expect it to feel like what they intuitively expect it to? That's so important because sometimes even as designers we come up with things like, oh yeah, it makes sense. I'm going to organize the information, this way, and then you deploy it into the real world, and then people are just like, no, this doesn't make sense.
Right. When I'm doing a hobby project, I just want to go off into a field and dream up the most unique user interface ever, and everybody's going to be astonished and amazed by my skills. But you guys know if you're going to start designing a real product for real people, you're probably going to do some competitive analysis just to see how do people solve this already. So yeah, what are the
usability testing too? I mean, that's huge. Like you always need to be thinking about your customer, and that's a big thing. Like even in Bitcoin open source products, a lot of people enjoy just kind of making open source products and being heads down for years, and then all of a sudden, years later, they're like, "Oh, actually, nobody knows how to use this." It's like, was there really a point? I guess if it's fun, but
Yeah, and that's like kind of a good segue into like the fact that I think a lot of open source projects, as designers, we don't want to like criticize and like shame Bitcoin wallets and Bitcoin projects, because a lot of times some really cool software just gets started by people who are like, I had a cool idea, I wanted to code it, and then it's a one person team. And like 2 years pass, and suddenly all these people are downloading their project and using it, and they're struggling to keep up with issues and pull requests. And then how are they actually supposed to get into making it more usable for people? It's not that they like wanted to make something that was difficult to use. It's just that it's hard when you're an open source project that doesn't have funding. So that's kind of like what the Bitcoin design community initiative has really been about, is trying to create these resources for people, for open source Bitcoin projects, kind of like design infrastructure, so that we've got an icons kit, we've got a UI kit, we've got the design guide. So trying to create this infrastructure in place so that open source projects kind of have resources to turn to.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting, like almost like first step of UX UI. If you are a developer and you want design to improve your product, it's like almost the first user that needs to understand your product would be this designer. Like I've noticed, like it was Join Market had an open source initiative to design a UI for it. We helped Ben on Lightning Vortex, and a lot of that was just like, okay, Ben, how does this actually work? Like it's in his head, and he has presumably a vision for how it will work. But if he could manage to explain it to us, then we have the opportunity as designers and developers to succeed at delivering that a user interface that gets someone to the success that he's envisioning, but maybe is hard to express.
Yeah, and a product like Vortex, you want people to be using it, so you want it to be as usable as possible, because it's a privacy product, or even something like a Whirlpool or really anything. You'd rather have more people using it, or any Bitcoin product for that matter. So yeah.
So let's talk about the Austin Bitcoin Design Club a little bit. Like I talked a little bit about the Bitcoin design community, where you can join our Slack channel. It's bitcoin.design. You can find everything you need to know there, hopefully, if our UX is good. But then, so that's kind of a cyberspace thing, but then you two have your own thing you're doing in Austin. What's going on there?
Yeah, I'm kind of antisocial in cyberspace.
It's the same.
So I'm in the Bitcoin design Slack. I was like, there's just too much going on here, and my successful projects are almost always like I meet somebody in person, they're working on something cool, start collaborating with them. And so I just wanted to hopefully have more of that happening in Austin. And our co-founder Carr is a really great designer. He does like Thriller, Bitcoin, and I did a lot of the design for like TFTC. And so we're just really passionate about this. And I think as in Bitcoin, basically we don't have like the crazy VC bucks to have like pay a team $4 million to make the nicest website to launch our shitcoin. But we have useful things for the world that we want to make accessible to the world. And it's basically on us as a community to swarm those projects and find all sorts of whatever ways we can contribute to those. So I just want to hopefully lower that barrier to entry. And then, we just talk about design, talk about UX, talk about
news and inspiration too. That's important. Like I think to your point, Paul, for people building on Bitcoin products, and you're new to design, you don't really have a sense of visual design yet. I think that's a big goal for these in-person meetings, is just exposure to good design. Because the more exposure you have, the more you develop your taste. We were talking about taste earlier. It's like you develop a taste of good design, the more you're exposed to good design. And that's subjective, obviously. But
Yeah.
you can learn from the past, right? Like history is a good teacher of like what things have worked.
Yeah, and there are obviously there's a lot of design principles. That's our last meetup was we kind of talked about a few of these UX principles and also just design principles. My like dad happened to be in town and he's a graphic designer for decades, and so he talked about some basic stuff. Because if you're as an amateur designer like myself, I spend a lot of time just kind of moving things around in Figma until it starts to feel nice. But there are some guiding principles that can maybe get you to something that feels at least not unsettling, a little faster.
Yeah, I don't know. You're right. There's some things about like UX and UI that are very like scientific. Like I forget the name of it. Like there's some dude's last name's Law, but there's like this actual like law, and it goes back to like I think like the early '80s or late '70s, and it was like if you're building a user interface, which would have been rudimentary in that time, but like if you're building a user interface, the optimal location for a selection, something the user must select, there's like an actual like mathematical equation for like how far away it should be from where they are, because it's like if it's too far away, you can calculate the amount of distance they have to travel with the mouse cursor before the momentum becomes so much.
And like the further away it is from their mouse right now, the bigger of a button it should be, or something like that.
Because then they have more momentum and they have to slow down. And so that's why you have the nav bar on top of so many like desktop operating systems, because because it's fixed to the top of the screen and the mouse goes there, it's an infinite distance away.
Oh, because you have a wall you can run into.
Yeah.
There's a law. I plug this all the time. It's Laws of UX. It's a website, and it just has a whole series of these, and you can just like read one a day and like learn a lot about. You'll very quickly start noticing these kind of patterns in the tools you're using, and then by understanding it better, developing your taste, you'll be much more effective.
I think a lot of that stuff, like the foundations and the basics, are really good to sort of get the things that are like context out of the way, the stuff that aren't really going to help your app win, so that you can focus on like what are the things that differentiate your app, whether it's like a Lightning product or like a multi-sig product. You can focus on like the things that are actually going to make you win, rather than like spending hours and days thinking about like, oh, what should the hamburger menu look like or whatever. You can just take these adopted practices, these best practices essentially.
Hey, we talk about this a lot in development. You have a kind of a novelty budget. Like you can maybe choose one weird technology in your tech stack, but probably not two, and definitely not three. So there's probably some similar parallel in design.
Yeah, I could say that. Yeah, I think that seems reasonable to me, to assume that. Like, I mean, you can, if your website is just too obscure, then I mean, you're kind of shooting yourself in the back. But sometimes people do it. I mean, sometimes it's kind of a flex when you build like a really weird website that's like has a strange, bizarre user interface, because it's like, it's like, am I important enough for people to figure this out?
Yeah, I guess it also kind of depends on what your goals are. Like if you're trying to build a mass market product, you probably don't want to be too crazy. You probably don't want to like mess around too much, at least on the context stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something about your core that you want to,
Well, and something Sahil and I both deal with is, I'm in Lightning, he's in custody. There are so many concepts we're trying to introduce to the users, and basically every new concept is an opportunity for them to fail in our user journey. Yeah. Like we could just, this happens on Voltage. People spin up a node, and they knew so much. They knew about Bitcoin, they knew about Lightning, they signed up for a Voltage account, they created a node. Mm-hmm. But there's more things. Now they need to learn what channels are and inbound liquidity and how to manage the node. So there's a lot of complexity. So it's a real challenge.
And then like with multisig, it's like you have these devices that you need to plug in, and technically it's the device is not a key, and there's like multiple keys, but people just think of them as the key. So what do you call it? You call it a device, you call it a key. Naming is a whole nother rabbit hole. It's like honestly probably like half my job is thinking about what to call things.
Hardware wallet or signer?
Oh, God, I feel like I should just call it keys. But I don't know. Maybe that's controversial.
How do you sign something with a key?
That's true. You unlock. I don't know. It's tough. It's tough.
Just wanted to bike shed a little bit for anyone who's maybe watch this on YouTube later. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. It's like a common debate that pops up in the Bitcoin design community about like what to call things, and these long, lengthy Slack arguments start up, and it's good. It's productive. It's like it's like, as Jeremy Rubin likes to say, this is the work. And,
Yeah.
it feels weird because sometimes we'll just have these like threads running, arguing about like, very like nitpicky terms. But, it's useful in the long
I just
run.
try to stay out of them.
The other thing I think a lot about in Bitcoin is that there's this, like, one of the most popular books in Bitcoin, or in general UX, normie UX, is called "Don't Make Me Think," and that is not a Bitcoiner mindset. That's a very fiat way of I'm going to develop a product that will control the user and condition them into habits that make my business successful. And that's not what we're trying to do at all.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the wisdom of UX, we have to, be really discerning about what we're going to use, because ultimately we want to empower the user and give them the flexibility to be, and the power to be, self-sovereign as much as possible, while also, we don't want them to fail right away. So that's an interesting, I don't know if it's a line we have to walk or basically a new branch of UX research that we need to develop.
Well, they call it dark patterns. It's like, this idea that you go to an app or website and there are these patterns that, like you say, are these design patterns that are trying to convince the person to sign up for something without realizing what they're doing. It's like you go to a website and it's like you actually have to tick a box to make yourself not get signed up for an email. Like, you think it would be the opposite. It's like, tick this box to join our mailing list, but instead it's like, ticks this box to not join our mailing list. Or they'll have like, a giant green button that stands out that, signs you up and charges you more money. And then the button to actually opt out of that is like real small. And so you get these kind of patterns all the time. And yeah, it's like, well, businesses, I feel like, are incentivized to do that to some degree, but it doesn't always seem ethical.
Yeah, it's low time preference.
Just to kind of build on what you were saying, Paul, the "don't make me think" thing. I think that's fair. I think there's kind of a balance though, because like if you think of, for example, what I'm working on, like the multi-sig vaults. If you're a business, you're a partner in business, you want to hold Bitcoin, but at the end of the day, you kind of don't really care about the details. Like, you don't really care about like what BIP32 path is my key derived from or whatever. Like, you just kind of want to get on with your life. But at a certain point, when you need it, there's like a 1% time when you may need to recover your vault in Sparrow. So like, there's like a path to being like, most of the time things are kind of abstracted away, but when you need it, it's like, oh yeah, now we can educate you to like, how do you actually be, how do we enable you to use something like Sparrow and be interoperable?
Yeah. Well, so I'm thinking now, it might be time to get into like open design a little bit. Typically with a lot of products and services and stuff are kind of built behind closed doors. I think of open design as being where you're kind of designing your work in public. A good example of this would actually be like the block, like multi-sig product they're doing. They haven't finished working on it, but they're actively like blogging and like sharing their updates on what they're working on to try and get feedback from people. And similar to a lot of what we do in Bitcoin design community and at the Austin Bitcoin Design Club. So why don't we just do that right here in person? We got some Figma files here. Let's talk about some work. I'm actually going to open this up to the audience too. We're basically just going to spend the rest of the session here just going through some Figma files and giving feedback and critiquing and talking about what design problems we're solving. So if anybody has any questions, now would be a good time. And let's look at some stuff here.
What do you guys want to pull up? Can we pull up, Stephen, the one we worked on together? I really like that.
Oh yeah, was that the you talked about the BIP21?
Yeah. No, not that one. Bitcoin payments.
Yeah, Bitcoin payment request. Yeah, so this is Figma. If anyone's not familiar, this is a collaborative design software. So sometimes you'll be working in Figma and your friends will jump in and you'll see like 5 mouse cursors dragging stuff around.
So this was a really fun workflow where I was at Voltage and I was implementing a thing where do you pay, that toggle, do you pay on chain or do you pay Lightning? And I was like, wait, isn't there like something in Bitcoin addresses to the Bitcoin URI basically to add more information? Why don't we just put a Lightning invoice in that? So I asked Evan Kalutis about it, and he's like, oh yeah, check out Bitcoin Design. So I hop in, there's already a Slack room for this very concept, and there's a Figma in the works. I was like, so how do I help?
Yeah, and then Paul, so I shared the Figma link with Paul, or you found it in the Slack or whatever, and then Paul went and set up basically a Next.js React project for us so that we could actually get the website into production. You coded a good bit of it.
So wait, Stephen, what was that like when you guys were working on that? Were you putting updates in the channel? Like, what was that process of open design like?
Yeah. I mean, so pretty much, I would update the Figma file, put some stuff in, drop it in the channel, drop it in the Slack channel, say, hey guys, I've made some updates to this Bitcoin payment requests website. This is a campaign we essentially did to kind of educate people about the technology and how to use it and kind of keep track of which wallets support it and did it. So I posted the link
comments
in there.
here.
Yeah, and I posted the link, and then other people like Doc Sharp would come in and say, hey, you need to capitalize a QR code, and then I said some technical stuff back, and eventually he was right, I was wrong. But yeah, I mean, you can just see like all kinds of like conversations going back through there. So,
and just so you know, Figma is free software. It runs on the web. You can also download. I have it running as a desktop app, but you need the internet. But you can literally, I mean, these links to these Figmas. It's not like a Google Doc. It's like pretty easy to get into and potentially start adding comments or at least scrolling around and seeing what people are up to. It's kind of fun to spy on other projects.
Hey, Stephen, we got a question in the back. That's all right?
Yeah, go for it.
Hey, you talked a bit about the open source process, and you're talking about it now. I bet you deal with some pretty opinionated engineers, and that have like a specific vision that might not adhere to the design principles, and you, in all of y'all's wisdom, like understand why and how to make it better. Could you talk a bit about like how it's like working with some super opinionated engineers, and maybe shed some advice on how to, I don't know, coerce people in a better direction?
Well, I mean, I honestly, my experience is that most engineers actually very like they a lot of times they want your help a lot, and so I actually hasn't been an issue. I mean, I just approach it from like a place of trying to understanding. I mean, like I think like design is a little bit soft. Like I don't know how you feel about like it's like we have these like things that are like just kind of basic things like, okay, choose a legible typeface, make sure the typeface is big enough to read right. And like those kinds of things are absolutes. A lot of other things I think are very like contextual and depend on your like audience and who you're targeting the app to and what their life experience has been like. So there's a lot of things that are subjective. So I don't like approach it like being a designer is like, I'm here to tell you what's right and like what's wrong with your design. It's more like I'm here to like help and collaborate with you and try to understand who you're building this for, and try to understand what it is that you're building, and then we can work on a good solution together. So I mean, I think it's just kind of general, emotional intelligence. Don't you're not there to dictate solutions. You're there to collaborate with them and to learn and understand, and just approach it with curiosity, I would say.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, one way that's really helpful, whether you're working at a company or an open source product, if you're trying to well, you want to validate the design you're working on. So if you do usability testing and you find that people actually like this redesigned feature or version of this open source product, you could take that research to the lead maintainer or the lead developer and kind of convince them that way. So
that's good, more practical advice than my rant.
No, that's fair.
User testing, Alex. Yeah. User testing.
Yeah, a lot of times whoever has the better story for the why of how they want to do it is kind of probably who wins usually.
I think there was another question up front, maybe.
Sup?
Nope, maybe not.
No? Okay.
I wanted to show off this. This was a really fun. This is the Ellen Vortex stuff. And
I haven't seen this. Cool.
Like Sahil and I, like we got in this. Oh yeah, we copied and pasted the whole join market work in progress just
Open
to like
design.
have some reference of like, okay, here's what a really good one of these would be like. But we just pretty much did it over a weekend where we basically like had Ben, like we kind of made a mood board of things he liked. We just like, what is appealing to you, and let's like try to find some stuff like that, and like pulled a color scheme out of that. And then Sahil did a lot of like organization of like, like what we actually needs to go on each screen. And then I started to design some screens for this, and I still didn't really understand Element Vortex. And then I just kind of walked away, and like I see somebody's laptop the other day, and this is like what Element Vortex looks like now.
What, he already implemented it?
So it's already been implemented by somebody else. I didn't even have to do the work.
I know that happened to me once too. Once on I did like an idea for like a Fediment, like a Guardian setup workflow. Not the other one. Yeah, it was like I just did this like flow for like what would it look like when the Guardians are setting up their nodes, and I just like posted it in I think like Fedi Discord or something, and then like like a week later it had been implemented. Like it's like on some other branch, but like someone started just like what? I had no idea.
I mean, from a developer perspective, like a lot of times you're staring at a blank screen, or maybe like an unstyled, like you have a button and you have the text and it's like in the default browser aesthetic, and it's like, how could I make this just look 1% better?
Yeah.
So if there is a design, the design does not have to be perfect. The design could just be kind of like a nice guiding light for how I can make it 1% better, and that could be like enough for a lot of these projects.
Paul, what are some of the challenges? Like, because I haven't really contributed much, honestly, to like here and there to open source design. But if there are designers in the audience who are trying to contribute to open source, what are some things they can do to make it easier for someone like you or you guys or front end developers to just kind of hit the ground running and not have to think about a lot of this stuff?
What can like a project do?
Yeah, like what can the designer do to make it easier?
Or
Is
what
it just
can
kind of using Figma and kind of?
You mean to make it easier on the developer?
Oh,
Yeah,
on the
exactly.
developer?
Yeah.
I like it when designers use, there's like some Flexbox stuff in Figma. I think that's pretty nice. I really like the use of components, because as a developer, you're using components like in React or whatever. And so by creating a design out of modular reusable components, and kind of the fewer the better, that means as a developer, I can just, okay, if I focus and implement these 5 different components, and I see the color palette here are like the 7 different color tokens I need to pull in, and then everything else is just Flexbox layout, and it's all been defined in Figma. My path is really easy. So like as a developer, I am capable of looking at just like a random Figma and kind of componentizing it myself. But those are some things that make it easier to work from.
And I guess you can think of the components as kind of like these Lego pieces that you kind of stitch them together, and you can reuse them for multiple screens and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, the more like variation there is it's harder to build.
yeah. I think we got a question.
We got one more question.
Hey guys, I consider myself to be like a lazy developer, or if I'm in that evolution anyway. How do you see the easiest way for a developer to take something that you've put in Figma and start creating components without having to do it completely manually? Or I guess the bigger question is, what gaps or what disconnects do you see between the designer making a Figma file and the developer wanting to take it and build their own thing? And is there anything that can fill that gap in an automated way? Or is it always going to be the developer's responsibility to like, make what they see?
Storybook, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to say Storybook. Yeah, we've been using that heavily. And
So yeah, I've never used it, but I hear good things. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, so it's a really useful way for front end developers to essentially build the Figma components you make, so like the Lego blocks that you make in Figma, and the developers will write it once, and then you almost get like the sandbox where once you've designed the component and once it's built, you can kind of play around with these knobs and be like, oh, actually, I want to change this color and I want to change the text, and you can see it live in code. Because in Figma, we like to say like, oh yeah, we have a design system and that's a source of truth. But really, if it's not in code, like it's not really the source of truth. So Storybook is a really great way of like, that's the source of truth. It's in code. You can play around with these knobs, and then even for developers, they kind of just pull in from Storybook, and you make a change in one place, and it kind of ripples through every instance of that component that you're using. So,
and to translate this to like developer lingo a little bit more, I think the way Storybook works, correct me if I'm wrong, is it essentially takes your Figma components and turns them into React components for you.
Does it?
I thought, but I might be wrong on that. I thought
no. You have to.
Can someone describe it a little bit better then?
Yeah, it's like a library you'd add to like a React project, and all the components that you're using in your site, you also list in the Storybook, and it's kind of a way to easily review the components you've built while referencing the Figma.
Gotcha.
But I'm hopefully going to be out of a job soon where, I mean, Figma at this point is expressing UI at a fine enough level that it will be exportable. Tools that already do this, they're just, a little rough around the edges. Maybe they put some spammy code in the component they export, but you will be able to take Figma components, export them as React components, and just start using them right away. And I think that's kind of the future we're going to, and I'll just move on and find something else to do because I enjoy the fiddly CSS implementing a Figma with using Tailwind or something like that. The other way to do it is there are design systems like Material UI, for instance, and there's a few of them, and they have a component library in Figma. So you start your Figma project, you take that component library, you make your customizations of the colors and the border radius and the shadows and whatever, and then there is a developer parallel component library that you can import as well. So you import the code of that component library, make the exact same tweaks that you made in the Figma, and that is a much faster path to success. I haven't used them a lot personally because I like the CSS by hand, but
Actually, Paul, that's such a good point. If there's anyone in the audience who is just trying to get a project out fast, or even just a starting point, is starting with a library like Material or Untitled UI or Tailwind. You get a lot of the context stuff, the secondary things that, again, you shouldn't be focusing too much time on. It's you don't want to reinvent the wheel on these things. So get started with something like that. Push your product out, do usability testing, and focus on the things that are core to your product. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you can just grab a lot of off-the-shelf kind of developer kits for building nice UIs, and I think that's really, really great for just getting your MVP out the door and getting it to a state where it's a little more legible for users, and then you can worry about making it look more prettier or branded or whatever when you're farther along in your product development. All right, so I am not paying attention to the clock, so somebody's going to have to come shut me down and drag me off the stage when it's time. 8 minutes are cool. Why don't we look at another project, Paul?
what do you want? We got Fetty or Fluttermint.
Oh, cool.
Fluttermint's really
This is
cool.
a pretty fun project. Yeah, what is this? Yeah, this is pretty interesting. Here's a working file of comparing payment flows between wallets.
Is this open? Is this published somewhere? Because this would be really useful for people who are
I
building
think
wallets.
it's linked to in the GitHub. So I made a Flutter wallet on top of Fediment using Skylar made the design, and it was just so much fun to work from because I really liked the design. But yeah, there's just here's some competitive research of these send and receive flows. Which was helpful. And
something like this is really good as a starting point for your designs when you're in the divergent exploratory phase. You get to see hey, what are other people doing? What is this?
we got a mood board. Yeah, sorry, Sahil. Yeah,
No, you're good.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah,
this is important.
Yeah. It's just great to see what are other products doing and what's good about it, what's bad about it as a starting point. As part of your explorations.
And then that progressed to a wireframe, which is a low fidelity design. If you're not familiar.
Kind of just squint at it and you're oh, the button goes here and the text goes here.
Just general placement.
Yeah.
Get everything kind of.
And then you get to add all the shadows and which is where I get really excited. So yeah, this is the actual Figma that I worked from. There was a really cool thing that happened. So I had a pretty rough version of this, and then where was that? It was in the working file. I got there was a QA. I really enjoyed this workflow where I had implemented things in a certain way. I put these little rounded corners, I'll make it nice when you're scanning. And Skylar points out, well, here's the design reference, Paul. So this contrast between what I had built and what the design is, hey, move this down to the center and stuff. That was a really easy flow for me as a developer to be able to reference this. So it's just a quick punch list of things I could improve to be closer. Because usually you're never going to actually exactly match the design, and sometimes that's completely fine. But if the designer for something is very important to them, you want to try to get there.
Yeah. So just if anyone's not familiar, because I see stuff like this all day, but if you're not used to the design flow, those are screenshots taken from what Paul has coded. That's right?
Yeah.
And then the stuff at the below is what Skylar wanted it to look like. So this is a good example of the kind of designer-developer collaboration kind of forming, I think, a good rapport with the engineer that you're working with, and finding like a workflow that works for the two of you. Be like, okay, this is what it looks like. This is what up here is what it looks like now. Down here is what I want it to look like.
And I think as you start doing that more often, you'll start to find common patterns that you go back and forth a lot about. It's like, oh, we're always talking about spacing, or we're always talking about like our fonts are a little bit off. And I see Buck smiling in the audience because we do that every day. But eventually you find these things that you're always talking about, and you're like, oh, how can we improve our process and fix this part of the process? We're like, oh, let's we should make fonts into tokens, and then we don't have to deal with what size is it.
Yeah. So what kind of problems were you trying to solve with Flutterment? Like, what was the like challenge with this one?
Just wanted a simple wallet so that you could. It's kind of almost it's like an optimistic user experience. Like, we're not going to put this in the app store, so this is kind of like a beautiful vision of the future where you're not really worrying a lot about how your wallet is working under the hood. So in that sense, and this is, to be honest, the place where I want to grow more is to get to more products that I am putting in the app store, that I am really shipping to customers, because I've done a lot of open source stuff in more this kind of fun ideation phase, but there's a lot of details to really nail to be really truly good enough to tell people you can put your money in it.
To ship, yeah.
This runs on mainnet, but I wouldn't ship it.
That's a good point that you brought up, the idea of the beautiful idealistic product that this is how I want it to be. And I think that's one thing that can be very powerful about the design process, is not just like not worrying how are we going to implement this right away. Like, eventually you will have to worry about how you're going to implement it, but sometimes it's good to kind of like free your thinking, I think, and just be like, okay, if I could build the perfect thing that I want to build, if it could exist, I could summon it into being. What would that be like? And then once you have that, then you can be like, once you have that vision for where you want to go, then you can be like, okay, well, we can't get there yet. We have to make some trade-offs here and there. But.
Yeah, actually, Paul, we were talking about this earlier. It's like one of the biggest jobs of being a designer is like you almost get to paint this vision of like what things could look like and inspire the whole team. Like, you inspire the back-end engineers and the front-end engineers and leadership. And once you have that inspiring vision of like, hey, this is what we could shoot for, then you can start working on like how do we actually get there and get to all the details.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about WebMint?
Oh yeah, sure.
This on the topic.
Yeah, this is one I'm in the process of, and if anybody wants to like provide feedback, like I don't know, jump into the Fediment Discord and all that. Yeah, I'll let you drive. But this was an interesting one because this wasn't like targeted for like people like regular users, like the idealistic person using Bitcoin every day. This is actually this like tool that the Fediment team put online that allows you to like interact with one of their federations through this like web tool, and they kind of wanted to use it as like a way to like educate like the hacker community about like how Fediment works and like what the differences are between, and like what the trade-offs are between a solution like Fediment and just like native Bitcoin. And so we kind of designed this as like an educational tool. So there's like this thing on the left here that's like, okay, it's like this like list of things that I want them to figure out how to do to spark their curiosity. So they can receive eCash from the faucet, and then it kind of like gives them their cash tokens right there. And then the idea would be that like if they clicked on these, and it would give them more information about the tokens they have in their wallet, and then it would tick off the Explore eCash ones. So the idea is it's kind of a testnet wallet, but it's also kind of like an educational tool to teach people, like developers who are interested in it, how the technology works.
I think the FM sats, I mean, we don't want to bike shed, but that's a really interesting thought there. Like, hey, let's be clear that these are not sats that you own in a sovereign way that is typical of Bitcoin. I forget who was talking about this. Taj was talking about this idea of, oh, shoot, he used a really good word for it, but it's like things that we call Lightning, but they are actually, you're using a custodial service that uses Lightning. And so when we start to teach users that that's what Lightning is, and then they get rug pulled by it, or something happens, or like they think that it's so easy, we can maybe distort the message of what this actually is. So I think FM sats, I mean, I'd want to bike shed it for 2 hours, but it's a really interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, yeah, we'll have to figure out what the exact like denomination for like Fedimint Bitcoin should be. So I think I'm getting the signal here that we're approaching time. But we're not going to get off the stage. We're just going to keep going through Figma files for the rest of the day. You're stuck with us, guys. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, so I think, yeah, we should probably wrap up now. But that's cool. Thank you for joining me, you two. Where can people follow your work?
I'm on Future Paul on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm at Sahil C0. And again, shout out to Austin Bitcoin Design Club. Come
Hey,
through.
if you're in Austin, make sure you check out one of their meetups. And thanks, everyone.
Thank you.